Well, hello, welcome back. Let me take a few minutes, first of all, to bring you up to date a little bit on the structure of the class and some of the things that we're actually doing. This week is now Chapter 6, and your quiz will cover Chapter 6. In fact, I'm not going to be lecturing on Chapter 6. I told you at the very beginning that there are many times when what I'm lecturing on doesn't exactly correspond to the book. So you need to read the book and listen to the lectures. The quiz will be all from the book, and I won't have covered very much of it at all, maybe a little bit incidentally, but not directly. So in order to do well on the quiz, you need to study the book thoroughly. But let me tell you, all of the questions are taken from the book. And if you read the book and study it, you will get the answers to all the questions. They're all there in the book. So this week, you'll be working strictly from the book for your quiz. The lectures, which I'm going to start in a few minutes, will actually be covering Chapter 7. And I'm going to need 2 weeks to cover all the material in Chapter 7. So this week will be, in lectures, will be Chapter 7. And then the quiz next week will be also on Chapter 7 with material from the book. I do that because Chapter 7 is, I think, one of the most important chapters in the book. It deals with the Constitution. And I think that one of the main things you need to get out of this class is an understanding of the U.S. Constitution. Other material we cover I think is important. It's important for you to know why people left England and came to America, the role of religion, the role of economics, all sorts of the things we've talked about. It's all important. It's all part of what you need to understand as a thoroughly well-grounded U.S. citizen, as a person who lives in this country, to understand a little bit about your country. But the Constitution really is most important because we have so much concern for the Constitution, especially today. There are so many threats to the Constitution. It's very important to understand what the Constitution is about, what the framers wanted it to be, what they were trying to do. And so we're going to spend 2 weeks really on that whole subject. So you'll have to read the book for Chapter 6 for this week for the quiz, but be ready for using all of this material next week on the quiz on Chapter 7. We start with looking at the Articles of Confederation. And I just started that in the last lecture. One of the things that the Continental Congress did, the Second Continental Congress, they drafted what they called the Articles of Confederation. And just to remind you from last week, it was set up as a contract among the states. The states, as states, were entering into an agreement to have a government that would do certain things. And so the Articles of Confederation spelled out what the quote-unquote government would consist of. And we're going to argue again about whether it's really a government or not. There's a little debatability about that. It's a tricky question, and we'll investigate it. So let's finish with the Articles of Confederation. As any contract, and this is a contract among the states, it has to be ratified by all of the parties. I mean, that's law. I mean, any legal contract, any contract you enter into, a business contract, a contract to buy a car, anything, it has to be ratified. It has to be signed by the parties. And the parties are the states. And the actual people who acted for the states were their state legislatures. So all of the state legislatures had to ratify the Articles of Confederation. 12 states did so easily. Americans were really committed to the need to have a written constitution. Things have to be done by law. Laws have to be written. People have to know what the laws are. And the Americans, as I said last week, were really rejecting this idea that that they found that Parliament had sometimes, where Parliament just sort of said, well, the law is whatever we say it is, and they could say whatever they wanted. That's what we will not accept. The laws have to be written, and they have to be clear, and everybody has to understand them, and everybody has to agree to them. So that's why they want this done. So they're anxious to get it done because Congress is acting without any guidelines. Congress is just, it's as bad as Parliament. They're just sort of doing what they want to do. So they want to make sure that Congress has rules, that there's laws, there's rules, there's things set down in writing that explain what Congress can do and what it can't. So that's why they've drafted this, and people are anxious to get that done. They want it approved, they want the legal things taken care of, and taken care of right. So 12 states ratified the Articles, and then one state would not. And everybody's frustrated by that. And everybody's mad at the state because it won't ratify the Articles. And sometimes when I'm in class, I love to have the students say, well, which state was that? And there's no reason why you would expect it. It's kind of one of my being silly in class. There's no way that you would expect the state that would refuse to ratify for it to be. And it was Maryland. And you might say, what? Why Maryland? Well, in fact, Maryland was not really rejecting the Articles. They didn't have any objection to the Articles. They were perfectly willing to have the Articles like everybody. But they had another issue that they were pushing, and they were using the ratification of the Articles to get at another issue that they had in mind. And this is it takes a little explanation. It's not obvious. Forever, Maryland had sort of been a rival of Virginia. The two states are right next to each other. They're separated by the Potomac River. And they had always sort of been rivals. They have a very similar economy. They're both sort of based on tobacco plantations at that time. But always Virginia was much larger than Maryland. At the time of the Revolution, Virginia was the largest state, both in area and in population. And I don't know where Maryland was, but it was a small state. As states go, Maryland is one of the smaller ones. So Maryland was always overshadowed by Virginia. And the issue that Maryland is really bugged about in 1780, 81, when the time is calling to ratify the Articles, the thing that bugs them is land in the West, which we've talked about. And I hope you understand that this is going to be a big issue. It has been already. This is one of the reasons why we went to war against England, because England gave that land in the West to Quebec, which just irritated the Americans. Remember, the Quebec Act was one of the intolerable acts, one of the acts that led to the calling of the First Continental Congress, because Americans felt that land in the West belonged to them. And by the land in the West, I mean everything from the Appalachian Mountains to the Mississippi River. And at first we're only dealing with the Northwest. We're dealing also with the area west or north of the Ohio River. And that's very valuable land. There's a lot of good land out there, a lot of land for good farming land, and all kinds of other resources that we don't even know what they are. The one that we're really aware of, and that's right up at the front, is of course the fur. There's a lot of beaver in that area, so that's a well-resourced fur area. But there's untold other resources, timber, minerals, nobody even knows. There's a lot of stuff out there. And Virginia, of all the American colonies, claimed all of that land for itself. And Virginia felt that that was their land, and it was Virginia that was most agitated with the original proclamation line, which originally gave that land to the Indians. And then when England finally decided, okay, it would be all right to have settlement out there, they gave it to Quebec. And so that's been a point of issue. But it's Virginia that claims that land. And Maryland doesn't want them to have it. Maryland feels They're already overshadowed by Virginia. Virginia is already the largest state, and Maryland is this relatively small state, and they're completely overshadowed by Virginia. And if Virginia gets all of that land, it'll be even worse. So Maryland doesn't want Virginia to get that land. And the way they're trying to do that is by withholding ratification of the Articles. As I said, they don't really object to the Articles. It's not about the Articles itself. It's that Maryland is using the Articles as a weapon to get at Virginia. And they don't want Virginia to have that land, and they're not going to ratify the Articles until something is arranged so that Virginia will not get that land. So there's a standoff goes on for a couple of years, and people are really frustrated with it because they want the Articles to be ratified. I mean, Congress is doing stuff. Congress is fighting a war. There's a war going on, and Congress is raising money. They're signing contracts. They're signing treaties. They're authorizing armies. They're doing this. They're doing that. Doing all these things, and they legally don't have a right to do anything. And they're real conscious of that. They're real sensitive to that. That we're not really following our own rules here. We've got to have some rules. We've got to get these Articles ratified. And Maryland won't do it. Finally, in 1781, Virginia gives way. Virginia gives in. The state of Virginia decided that they would relinquish their claim to that land in the West. They would not proceed to do it. And once they made that decision, then Maryland said, okay, I mean, there's a battle between Maryland and Virginia. Maryland won. Why did Virginia give in? I will tell you, it was not a popular decision in Virginia. Virginia as a state and in its state government was badly divided over this issue. And there were many, many people in Virginia were very bitter about the fact that Virginia had, in a sense, conceded in their battle with Maryland. It was a decisive issue, and a majority ruled. A majority decided to give it in, but the minority was very unhappy that they had lost within the state of Virginia, and that Virginia lost then to Maryland. The person who brought that about was the governor of Virginia. He was a governor for only a short time. The governors of Virginia in those days served only 1 year, and it was not the calendar year. They ruled from, their governor's term was from July to June of the next year. So there was a governor of Maryland for what, 1780, 81, from June of, starting in July of 1780 until the end of June of 1781. And he's a familiar name. It was Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, as the governor of Virginia, persuaded his state legislature, they're still calling themselves the House of Burgesses, the name that they'd been using for a couple hundred years. Jefferson convinced the House of Burgesses to make this decision to relinquish the land in the West. And as I say, a lot of people in his state were very unhappy with him, that he had in a sense, prevailed on that issue. And you need to understand why Jefferson acted as he did. And I'm bringing this up because there's an important philosophical issue involved there. There's an important issue of political philosophy that I want you to understand. That's why I talk about this. I mean, this is an issue that hardly ever makes it into the history books. Very few people know about this issue, but I think it's a really, really important one. And I think the decision of Virginia to relinquish their claim was a very, very important decision in American history, one that not very many people know about. Jefferson was committed to a Republican government. So you should all make sure you get that in your books, in your notes. Republican government. This is a government that's based on the idea that the power of a government is in the hands of the representatives of the people. It's not exactly democracy. Don't confuse this with democracy. Democracy would be government by the people. Well, that's frankly not what Americans wanted. They were not interested in a government that would be in some way run by all the people. These are people, remember, who have sort of a fear of the people. They think of the people as kind of, oftentimes a word that they used in exchange for the people was the mob. When they think of the people, they think of mob rule. And these are guys who aren't comfortable with that. They definitely think that power of government has to come from the people. It has to be originated in its power from the people. Power of government comes from the people. It comes from the governed. But they want it to be done through representatives. They think if the people get up by themselves, they think of this as the mob. They had some misgivings about things like the mobs that brought down the Stamp Act. They always had sort of second thoughts. Yeah, it's good to get the Stamp Act out, but we're a little uncomfortable with this idea of having a mob do it. So they don't like mob rule. They want a republic where what the people do is elect representatives. And the idea is that the representatives, instead of being out on the streets, running around yelling and screaming and burning things and yelling and screaming ugly names about the British da-da-da-da-da-da, that they'll meet in a calm atmosphere. They will be, the assumption is that they will be the educated and the intelligent people in the community who will be selected by the people as their representatives. And then they will govern. Now, what they clearly do not want is monarchy. And the key feature of monarchy that Americans said absolutely was unacceptable was that it was based on inheritance. That the monarch was automatically a monarch just by the luck of having chosen the right father, and that they absolutely reject. So they want a republic. Well, political philosophers, if you want to call them that, had been talking about republics for centuries. It goes back to Plato or wherever, I don't even know. For hundreds and hundreds of years, philosophers of government, of politics, we would call them political scientists, had been thinking about and discussing the potential of a republic. And one of the things that they brought out was a republic works best in a small area of government. In order to have a republic work, the people sort of have to know their representatives, and the representatives sort of have to know the people. The representatives have to know the people that they represent. They have to know what the people want. They have to have some interaction with the people to be representatives. And if the government gets too big, if you're talking about a country that's huge, it's not possible. You either have to have too many representatives, or each representative has to represent too many people, just math. So there'd always been a feeling that republics are designed for and work in small units of government. And that's Jefferson's concern. He's afraid that if Virginia acquires that land, it will be too big, and it'll be too big to have a republic. He would rather have Virginia forego the wealth of that land and remain a republic. So he convinces the legislature to relinquish the claim. And we'll have to take a little stop here for a minute.